Miles had spent years chasing waves and light, traveling from coast to coast with his cameras, drone, and old but reliable jet ski. That morning at Point Reyes, the surf was crisp and glassy under a cold blue sky. A northwest swell had pushed in clean sets that broke beautifully across the reef. Dozens of surfers were out, and Miles, 32, lean and tanned with a quiet, focused demeanor, hovered just outside the break zone, piloting his drone above the lineup. He loved mornings like that, cold but not punishing, the wind low, and the sea alive with motion and light. His drone cast a thin shadow on the water, gliding silently above the glassy surface as he guided it in slow arcs, capturing the surfers carving along the waves. When the ocean exploded behind him, he was in the rhythm, checking the drone screen, glancing at the surfers, adjusting his balance on the jet ski. Without warning, a massive white shark breached the surface just meters away. The water erupted with foam and fury, and the shark rose vertically, twisting slightly in midair. Miles saw it only for a split second, its pale belly and slate-gray back contrasting against the sky, its mouth slightly open, eyes locked onto something. It wasn't going for a surfer. It wasn't going for the ski. It was lunging directly at the drone's shadow, which had just passed over the shallows nearby. The shark's body partially crashed onto the jet ski's back. The impact jolted the craft forward violently. Miles was thrown forward, his chest slamming into the handlebars before the shark's snout slammed into his back, knocking the wind out of him. One of its teeth raked across his right thigh as its head slid off the ski, and it fell back into the sea with a violent splash. Miles tumbled into the water, disoriented. The breath ripped from his lungs. Cold rushed in around him like ice. Blood clouded the water around his leg, and pain bloomed instantly in his thigh, sharp and deep. He flailed instinctively but couldn't tell which way was up. When he broke the surface, gasping, he was only feet from the jet ski, which bobbed low from the damage. Then he saw the shark again, circling slowly beneath the surface, visible in the blue-green haze. It moved with terrifying ease, long tail sweeping side to side, closing the arc. It wasn't in a frenzy. It was curious now, maybe confused, maybe still hunting. Miles tried to swim for the jet ski, but his leg wouldn't cooperate. His thigh burned with every kick. The water tasted of salt and blood. Panic rose fast, almost faster than the pain, and he knew he couldn't outswim what was beneath him. Further inside, the surfers had seen it all. One of them, a local named Jonah, had watched the breach with disbelief. Now he was paddling toward the crash site, yelling, slapping the water to draw the shark's attention. A few others followed, wide-eyed, moving fast despite the risk. Jonah reached Miles first. He looped an arm under Miles's shoulder and pulled him upright. The jet ski was just feet away but drifting, and Miles was barely conscious. His face had gone pale, and blood continued to pulse from the gash in his thigh. Behind them, the shark made another slow pass, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface like a blade. The other surfers circled wide, slapping the water and splashing to keep the predator focused on the noise. Jonah heaved Miles toward the jet ski, struggling to keep his head above water. He kicked with all his strength, heart pounding, terrified the shark would strike again. With one final push, he got Miles close enough to hook an arm over the damaged back seat of the ski. Miles groaned, half conscious, as Jonah scrambled up behind him. Together they rolled his bleeding leg onto the seat, blood dripping over the fiberglass. The shark moved away, then, finally, fading into deeper water. A faint trail of blood followed it, not from a bite, but from the thin lacerations on Miles's leg. The sea calmed again. The violence of the breach had passed, but the mark it left remained. The surfers helped guide the jet ski back toward the beach. It took nearly 20 minutes to get Miles ashore, where paramedics were waiting. His thigh was torn open along the outer muscle, but the damage wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been. The snout impact had bruised several ribs, and the tooth had missed the femoral artery by less than 2 centimeters. Surgery followed that same night. Doctors cleaned the wound, closed it with dozens of stitches, and told him how lucky he was. A few more inches and the shark would have taken his leg, or worse. He stayed in recovery for several days, visited by the surfers who helped him and the local news crews who wanted to hear the story. Marine biologists later reviewed the drone footage and came to a startling conclusion. The shark had breached at the drone's shadow, not because of Miles or the ski, but because the shadow resembled a seal gliding beneath the surface. The shark had likely mistaken it for prey and reacted with instinctive precision. It was one of the first confirmed cases where drone use may have indirectly triggered a shark breach. Experts warned that new tech, especially aerial devices casting strange shadows over water, could confuse apex predators that rely on vision and motion patterns to detect prey. Miles didn't blame the shark. He never had. He had understood it wasn't personal even during the attack. Somewhere deep in his mind, the ocean belonged to creatures like that. He had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a tool miming something nature didn't expect. Weeks later, Miles returned to the beach after the stitches came out, and the limp faded. He walked slowly to the surf's edge with his drone packed away, his jet ski still in storage, and a scar running the length of his thigh. He didn't bring a board. He didn't get a camera. He just stood in the water and watched the waves. The ocean didn't care who he was or what he brought with him. It moved like it always had, beautiful, indifferent, and wild. The waters off Stewart Island were cold, dark, and alive with movement, even on a calm day. Hannah had dived in many parts of the world, but respected this place more than most. At 36, she was experienced, careful, and quietly confident. She had logged hundreds of hours underwater, from tropical reefs to murky temperate zones. But this dive was different. It was a drift dive in one of the world's more unpredictable marine environments, where strong currents could push even the most seasoned diver far from the group, and where great whites were more than a distant possibility. She had flown into New Zealand a week earlier to join a small, tightly managed dive tour known for its wildlife encounters. The group consisted of 5 divers and 2 guides, all briefed thoroughly that morning. The goal was to ride a long, slow current through a narrow channel dotted with kelp forests and steep rock faces, a habitat known for seals, rays, and occasionally large predators. The first part of the dive went smoothly. The water was cold enough to numb fingers, but visibility was fair. Hannah floated effortlessly with the current, drifting past thick strands of bull kelp swaying like underwater trees. She kept her breathing slow and her limbs steady, enjoying the weightlessness and silence. Then, without much warning, the current shifted. It tugged harder, sweeping her slightly off to the right, away from the cluster of divers. She kicked gently, adjusting her buoyancy, but didn't panic. She could still see faint shadows through the water, but they were drifting at a different angle now, and she began to lose them behind a curtain of kelp. For a few seconds, she floated alone. That was when she felt it. Something massive surged from the gloom below, a shape so fast and deliberate it seemed to rise out of nowhere. A great white, nearly 4 meters long, had locked onto her movement. Isolated and drifting, she had become a singular object in the current, an anomaly. The shark rose with terrifying power, its white belly catching the filtered light, and before she could even think to react, it bit. Its jaws clamped around her left thigh, crushing wetsuit, muscle, and bone in a single motion. The pressure was overwhelming, a blast of pain so intense it turned into cold shock. The shark shook once, hard, tossing her like a rag doll in the water. Her regulator almost slipped from her mouth. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the shark let go. Blood clouded the water in wide ribbons as the great white turned and vanished into the blue, leaving only silence and pain behind. Hannah was conscious, barely. She looked down and saw her leg torn and streaming dark red, her wetsuit shredded, and bubbles escaping in bursts from her gear. Panic hovered at the edge of her thoughts, but instinct took over. She reached for the inflator on her vest and pressed it. Slowly, her body began to rise. Her vision blurred. She kicked feebly with her good leg, drifting toward the surface, hoping she wouldn't pass out. She had no idea where the others were. She didn't know if the shark would come back. On the surface, one of the guides had just completed a scan of the dive site when he spotted the sudden plume of blood. He raised the alarm, and the boat spun toward the source. A diver was ascending alone. The crew reached her within seconds, pulling her limp body from the water. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, but she was alive. Blood poured from the torn leg. One of the guides, a trained medic, clamped his hands around the wound and shouted for the tourniquet kit. The others scrambled to stabilize her. She didn't speak, just groaned faintly as they secured her leg and covered her in dry blankets. The bite had torn through most of her thigh, exposing muscle and rupturing veins. Her femur was intact, barely, but she was losing blood fast. They radioed for a helicopter and headed full speed back to the mainland. The airlift team met them near the dock. Paramedics transferred Hannah to a stretcher and began a transfusion en route to a hospital. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body shaking, her mind floating somewhere between fear and numbness. Over the next week, Hannah underwent multiple surgeries. Doctors repaired muscle, sealed arteries, and cleaned the massive wound. Miraculously, no infection set in. With time and careful treatment, the tissue began to heal. Nerve damage was limited, and though her leg would never quite be the same, she would walk again. The incident sent shockwaves through the diving community. Great white sightings near Stewart Island weren't uncommon, but actual attacks were rare. The fact that the shark had struck during a controlled dive and released after a single bite led experts to conclude it had likely mistaken her for a seal or drifting carcass. Her isolated movement in the current made her an easy target. The dive company suspended operations for the season. New safety measures were proposed. More precise diver tracking, mandatory buddy tethers during strong current dives, and stricter protocols for visibility loss. Hannah stayed in New Zealand for her recovery. She spent 6 weeks regaining strength, gradually learning to use her leg again. The pain was sharp at first, but her resolve never broke. She had always respected the ocean, and now that respect had deepened into something more, a recognition that nature remained wild and unsparing even in places of beauty. Months later, she returned to diving in warmer waters near Queensland. It wasn't easy. Her heart pounded harder, her gear felt heavier, and every shadow beneath her made her breath catch. But she kept going. She descended slowly, this time in calm seas, surrounded by others. She didn't drift far. She didn't let her eyes wander. She moved carefully, deliberately, like someone who had learned how thin the line could be. And she found peace in that silent world beneath the waves. Not because the fear was gone, but because she had survived it. Rains had pounded Beira for 6 days, turning dry streets into sluggish rivers and soccer fields into lakes. Storm drains overflowed. The Pungwe River burst its banks, and the entire fringe of the city looked like the sea had swallowed it. To the local kids it was chaos, but also adventure. Samuel was 15, lean and wiry, with a bold streak that often landed him in trouble. Just east of the city's outskirts, his neighborhood sat close to the floodplain. He had grown up watching the annual floods reshape the land, used to seeing water creep past the houses, fill the gullies, and submerge playgrounds. When the soccer field at the end of his street disappeared beneath a foot of water, it became an irresistible swimming hole. The rain had paused that afternoon, though gray clouds still hung overhead. The air was thick and wet, and Samuel and 4 friends waded through knee-deep currents and debris-strewn water to reach the old soccer field. The goalposts were barely visible, their top bars peaking like broken bones. The water was brown and opaque, full of runoff, branches, plastic, and swirling trash. They laughed as they splashed, throwing chunks of soaked grass at each other, diving under the surface, daring one another to swim the full length of the flooded pitch. The current was slow but steady, pulling gently eastward, and no one noticed how far they'd strayed toward the deeper corner, where the old drainage ditch fed into the field. Samuel swam out first, powering through the thick, warm water, enjoying the resistance against his arms. He was a strong swimmer, faster than the rest, always eager to lead. Pulling ahead, he felt something hard brush against his leg, but dismissed it as a submerged branch. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the flood had brought more than garbage. The swollen Pungwe had carried fish inland, pushed them into alleys, flooded yards, and shallow lakes. And following those fish was a bull shark. It had likely prowled the brackish estuary when the flood surge pulled it inland. Unlike most sharks, bull sharks could thrive in salt and fresh water, and during the monsoon season, they sometimes ventured far upriver or into floodplains chasing fish and carrion. The debris-choked water gave perfect cover, and the vibrations of the boys splashing were indistinct but unmistakable, erratic, panicked, like wounded prey. The attack happened in seconds. Samuel had just kicked forward when he felt a sudden, massive jolt. Something slammed into his right side, fast and solid, followed instantly by blinding pain in his upper arm. Before he could cry out, he was yanked beneath the surface, twisting violently as the water around him exploded in bubbles. His friends saw the commotion and froze. The water frothed, then turned red. A panicked scream rose as they saw Samuel reappear, thrashing, his body jerking unnaturally. One of the boys ran into the water, gripping his shoulder and dragging him toward the shallow end, while the others backed away in horror. The water stank of blood and mud. Samuel's right arm was a mess of shredded flesh and exposed bone, muscle torn open along the bicep. His face was pale and contorted in shock, but he was conscious, gasping, eyes wild with fear and pain. The bite had been brutal, but not fatal. Only one pass, the shark hitting high and fast, then vanishing into the murk. They pulled him to dry ground, screaming for help. Adults ran from nearby homes, rushing through ankle-deep water as someone called for aid. A volunteer paramedic team stationed nearby in a flood relief tent responded, arriving within 10 minutes with a stretcher. Samuel was pale, bleeding heavily, and beginning to slip out of awareness. The medic tied a tourniquet just below the shoulder and covered the arm in gauze soaked with antiseptic. He was rushed in a utility truck to a field hospital set up on higher ground near the port. Doctors worked quickly. The bite had exposed muscle and severed tendons, but arteries had been narrowly missed. He received a blood transfusion, underwent emergency surgery to repair damaged tissue, and was kept in a makeshift recovery ward. By the next day, he was stable. The incident spread quickly. Rumors flew about crocodiles or spirits in the water, but local marine biologists arrived to clarify. Based on the shape and angle of the bite, wide, crescent-shaped with deep punctures, they confirmed it had come from a bull shark, likely around 2 meters long. They explained that bull sharks often entered rivers during the wet season, and when extreme floods occurred, the boundaries between river and city blurred. The stagnant pools and floodwaters, full of fish and food waste, became accidental hunting grounds. It wasn't the first time. A fisherman near Chinde had been bitten in a similar flood 2 years earlier, but this attack was different. It had happened in an urban zone where children played, not where professionals worked. The government issued immediate warnings against swimming in floodwaters, and search teams patrolled flood zones in boats, keeping eyes open for further shark movement. Authorities considered erecting temporary fencing near key drainage zones to prevent marine life from entering suburban areas. Though with the flood still rising, there were no guarantees. Samuel stayed in the hospital for over a week. He didn't speak much during the first few days. The trauma lingered, deeper than the wound. He would startle when water dripped from a ceiling or wind slapped tarps around the tents. But slowly, he recovered. Doctors said he would regain arm use, though not full strength. When he returned home, his friends greeted him with nervous smiles and relief. The flooded field was still underwater, but now it was avoided, a silent, muddy reminder that the floodwaters were no playground. Samuel's story was retold by parents, teachers, and aid workers as a warning. The boy who survived the flood shark. A living reminder that the ocean's predators don't always wait offshore, that sometimes they follow the rivers, slip between streets, and strike where no one expects them. And for years afterward, when the rains returned and the water rose, those who remembered stayed away from the field because they knew what had once lurked beneath. Waters surrounding a small island off Western Australia have served as a naval testing ground since the 1940s. Located 18 kilometers from the mainland port city of Fremantle, this limestone island possessed unique acoustic properties that made it ideal for sonar calibration exercises. The surrounding Indian Ocean waters, reaching depths of over 200 meters within a few kilometers of shore, provided an environment similar to operational theaters, where naval vessels would deploy their sophisticated detection equipment. Local marine life had adapted to decades of intermittent sonar testing, though researchers noted that the area's great white shark population seemed particularly responsive to underwater vibrations. In 2018, the United States Navy vessel Steadfast arrived for joint exercises with Australian naval forces. The mission involved calibrating next-generation sonar arrays designed for submarine detection, a work that required precise underwater positioning of sensitive equipment. Chief Petty Officer Dana Holloway had volunteered for the technical diving assignments, her 12 years of naval service having prepared her for complex underwater operations in challenging conditions. The diving team had been briefed on local marine hazards, though great white sharks were considered a minimal risk given the controlled nature of their operations. The morning of the incident began with routine equipment checks aboard the research vessel Meridian Explorer. Dana and her dive partner, Petty Officer Second Class Rodriguez, prepared their mixed gas rebreathers for an 80-foot descent to position acoustic sensors along the seafloor. The water temperature registered 18 degrees Celsius, requiring thick neoprene suits and extended decompression schedules. Weather conditions were optimal, with minimal surface chop and underwater visibility exceeding 15 meters. Dana's military diving experience included operations in the Persian Gulf and Mediterranean Sea, but the Australian waters presented unique challenges. The rocky limestone formations created complex underwater topography, while strong currents required careful navigation to maintain position over the sensor deployment sites. Her equipment loadout included a primary and backup oxygen supply, underwater cutting tools, and communication gear linking her to the surface support team. The sonar calibration process required divers to activate acoustic beacons at predetermined intervals while surface technicians recorded signal strength and clarity. Dana had successfully positioned 3 sensors when the testing protocol called for a high-intensity pulse designed to simulate emergency detection scenarios. The powerful sonar burst, transmitted at frequencies known to travel efficiently through ocean water, created vibrations that marine biologists later theorized may have attracted the attention of a great white shark patrolling the deeper waters beyond the test site. Rodriguez later reported that the shark appeared suddenly from the murky water below their position. The great white, estimated at approximately 4 meters in length, demonstrated the species' characteristic approach pattern of rising from deeper water toward targets silhouetted against the brighter surface. Its initial strike targeted Dana's primary oxygen tank, the aluminum cylinder presenting a metallic profile that may have resembled prey fish to the shark's sensory system. The impact knocked Dana off balance, her regulator torn from her mouth as the shark's jaws crushed the oxygen tank's upper valve assembly. The force of the bite punctured the high-pressure cylinder, creating a violent release of gas that further startled both the shark and the diver. Dana's training took over as she reached for her backup regulator while simultaneously attempting to assess the damage to her primary life support system. The shark's behavior suggested confusion rather than predatory intent. Marine biologists studying the incident noted that the attack pattern differed significantly from typical feeding behavior, lacking the repeated strikes and thrashing movements associated with predation. Instead, the great white appeared to investigate the unusual metal object before determining it was not suitable prey. Rodriguez responded according to their emergency protocols, deploying a high-intensity strobe light designed to disorient marine predators while approaching to assist his dive partner. His underwater knife, intended primarily for cutting through fishing nets or rope, proved effective when thrust toward the shark's snout area. The combination of bright flashing lights and physical contact caused the great white to release its grip on the damaged equipment and retreat into the deeper waters. Dana's ascent became a race against time as her remaining air supply had been compromised by the damaged tank connections. Rodriguez maintained close contact while monitoring her vital signs through their integrated communication system. The surface support team prepared emergency medical equipment as the divers completed their decompression stops, though Dana's condition remained stable throughout the controlled ascent. Upon reaching the surface, medical evaluation revealed that Dana had suffered a collapsed lung from the pressure changes during the attack, along with severe bruising across her back and shoulders where the damaged equipment had impacted her body. The torn backplate of her diving harness showed clear tooth marks, providing forensic evidence of the great white's bite force and jaw structure. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of naval diving protocols in waters known to harbor large sharks. Sonar testing procedures were modified to include marine life monitoring, while diving teams received additional training on shark encounter protocols. Dana's recovery required 3 weeks of medical leave, during which time she worked with naval psychologists to process the traumatic encounter. Her return to active diving duty demonstrated remarkable resilience, though she reported heightened awareness of marine life during subsequent operations. The Navy commended both divers for their professional response under extreme circumstances, noting that their adherence to training protocols had prevented a potentially fatal outcome. The damaged oxygen tank was retained for analysis, its bite marks providing researchers with valuable data about great white shark jaw mechanics and bite pressure. Dana's survival became a case study in military diving safety, illustrating how proper training and equipment redundancy could overcome even the most unexpected underwater encounters. The incident reinforced the unpredictable nature of marine environments, where advanced military technology intersects with ancient predators operating according to instincts developed over millions of years of evolution. A small fishing town on South Africa's southern coast gained international recognition as a premier destination for great white shark viewing. Nearby islands create a narrow channel where dense populations of seals attract large numbers of great white sharks year-round. The area's unique geography, with its shallow kelp forests and deep offshore waters, created ideal hunting conditions for these apex predators. Local communities had developed a complex relationship with the sharks, simultaneously fearing and depending upon them for the tourism revenue that sustained many families. In 2017, the waters off the coast had experienced unusual shark activity patterns, with marine biologists reporting increased aggression and territorial behavior among the great white population. Some researchers attributed this to changing water temperatures and shifting prey distributions, while local fishermen noted that traditional fishing grounds had become increasingly dangerous for small boat operations. The town's economy depended heavily on shark cage diving operations, though these commercial activities had created ongoing debates about the ethics of deliberately attracting predators to areas frequented by local residents. Thabo Mbeki had spent his entire 48 years working the waters along the coast, initially as a crew member on fishing vessels before establishing his own small boat operation focused on traditional line fishing methods. His knowledge of local currents, weather patterns, and marine life had been passed down through generations of fishermen, though he recognized that changing ocean conditions required constant adaptation of traditional techniques. His 16-year-old daughter, Naledi, had shown exceptional aptitude for free diving, demonstrating the natural breath-holding abilities and underwater confidence that marked the best traditional divers. The father-daughter diving expedition had been planned as an advanced training session intended to develop Naledi's skills in deeper water while maintaining the safety protocols that Thabo had learned during decades of fishing in shark-populated waters. Their target area was a rocky reef approximately 2 kilometers from shore, where abalone and other shellfish could be harvested legally with proper permits and techniques. The location had been chosen specifically for its relatively protected position and historically low shark activity during daylight hours. Weather conditions on the morning of the dive were optimal, with minimal wind and exceptional underwater visibility that allowed clear observation of the seafloor at depths exceeding 20 meters. Thabo had thoroughly briefed his daughter on safety procedures, emphasizing the importance of maintaining visual contact with the surface and recognizing signs of marine predators. Their small boat was equipped with basic safety equipment, though the remote location meant that emergency assistance would require considerable time to arrive. Naledi's preparation for the dive included breathing exercises designed to extend her underwater endurance and mental conditioning techniques that would help her remain calm in potentially stressful situations. Her natural abilities had impressed experienced divers, though Thabo remained cautious about exposing her to the inherent risks of deep-water free diving in an area known for its shark population. The training session was intended to build her confidence gradually, while ensuring that safety remained the primary consideration. The great white shark that attacked Naledi appeared to have been attracted by the unusual activity patterns created by their diving operations. Marine biologists later speculated that the shark may have been investigating the boat's anchor chain or responding to vibrations created by their entry into the water. The attack occurred during Naledi's descent toward the 15-meter mark, when she was most vulnerable due to her focus on equalizing pressure and navigating toward the reef structure. The shark's initial strike targeted her lower leg, its massive jaws clamping down with sufficient force to penetrate her wetsuit and inflict deep puncture wounds. Naledi's training took over as she fought against panic while attempting to push the shark away using techniques that Thabo had taught her for dealing with marine predators. Her movements were hampered by the need to conserve oxygen, while simultaneously defending herself against an attacker that outweighed her by several hundred kilograms. Thabo, who had been monitoring his daughter's dive from the surface, immediately recognized the signs of distress when she failed to resurface at the expected time. His decision to enter the water despite the obvious danger demonstrated the instinctive response of a parent protecting his child, though his actions also reflected the practical knowledge gained through years of working in shark-inhabited waters. His approach involved creating maximum disturbance, while maintaining enough distance to avoid becoming a secondary target. The shark's behavior during the attack suggested investigative, rather than predatory intent, with the relatively brief contact time indicating that Naledi did not fit the profile of the great white's preferred prey species. Her vigorous defensive movements and the arrival of her father likely convinced the shark that she represented more effort than reward, leading to its decision to abandon the attack and retreat to deeper water. Naledi's ascent to the surface required considerable effort due to her injuries and the shock of the encounter, though her free diving training proved invaluable in maintaining controlled breathing and avoiding panic-induced mistakes that could have worsened her situation. Thabo's assistance during the final stages of her ascent ensured that she reached the boat safely, where immediate first aid could be administered while they returned to shore for proper medical treatment. The wounds inflicted by the shark required extensive surgical repair, though Naledi's youth and overall fitness contributed to a remarkably successful recovery process. Her experience became a source of inspiration within the local diving community, demonstrating how proper training and mental preparation could enable survival even during the most challenging encounters with marine predators. The incident strengthened the bond between father and daughter, while providing valuable insights into great white shark behavior and human-shark interaction protocols. Naledi eventually returned to free diving, though with enhanced safety measures and a profound respect for the power of the marine predators that shared her underwater world. Her story became part of the local folklore, illustrating both the dangers and the resilience required for those who chose to make their living from the sea's unpredictable bounty. Off Cape Town, South Africa, had long been recognized as one of the world's most concentrated great white shark habitats, with the convergence of warm Indian Ocean and cold Atlantic currents creating ideal conditions for both the sharks and their primary prey species. A large bay on the eastern side of the Cape Peninsula served as a crucial hunting ground, where great white sharks gathered to feed on the dense Cape fur seal colonies inhabiting a nearby island. The area's reputation among marine researchers and adventure tourists grew steadily, while local communities maintained a deep respect for the apex predators that patrolled these rich waters. In 2020, the region had experienced unusual environmental conditions that marine biologists attributed to shifting ocean temperatures and altered current patterns. These changes had disrupted traditional feeding behaviors among various species, leading to increased predator activity in areas typically considered safe for recreational diving. Lena Vasquez and Sasha Petrov had traveled from their home countries to experience South Africa's renowned great white shark populations through cage diving operations based in Gansbaai. Both women possessed advanced diving certifications and had participated in similar expeditions in Australia and Mexico, though neither had encountered great whites in their natural hunting environment. Their friendship had been forged through shared adventures in challenging marine environments, with both women demonstrating the confidence and technical skills required for advanced diving activities. The dive expedition had been organized by a local operator with extensive experience in great white shark tourism, though the specific site selected for their adventure diving was located several kilometers from the traditional cage diving areas. This rocky reef system, known locally for its diverse marine life and excellent visibility, attracted advanced divers seeking encounters with sharks in a more natural setting than the controlled cage diving environment could provide. Water conditions on the day of the attack were exceptional, with visibility exceeding 20 meters and water temperature reaching 18 degrees Celsius. The reef structure extended from depths of 5 meters to over 40 meters, creating complex underwater topography that supported diverse marine communities. Schools of yellowtail and other baitfish had been observed in the area during the previous week, potentially attracting the attention of larger predatory species. Both women had completed extensive briefings on great white shark behavior and safety protocols, including techniques for minimizing the risk of predator encounters and appropriate responses if sharks were observed during their dive. Their equipment included underwater cameras for documenting marine life, though they had been instructed to avoid rapid movements or activities that might attract unwanted attention from large predators. The great white shark that attacked Sasha appeared to have been patrolling the deeper waters adjacent to the reef system when it detected the unusual activity patterns created by the diving pair. Great whites are known to investigate novel stimuli in their territory, particularly when such disturbances occur in areas associated with feeding opportunities. The shark's approach from below followed the species' typical hunting pattern, using the darker depths to conceal its presence until the final strike. Sasha had been photographing a school of fish near the reef's edge when the attack occurred. Her attention focused on capturing images rather than monitoring for potential threats. The great white's initial strike targeted her thigh with devastating force, its massive jaws designed to inflict maximum trauma to disable large prey. The impact knocked her off balance while the shark's powerful body created turbulence that made it difficult for her to orient herself or respond effectively. Lena's response to her friend's predicament demonstrated remarkable courage and presence of mind under extreme circumstances. Her decision to physically engage with a great white shark contradicted conventional wisdom about shark encounter protocols, though the desperate nature of the situation left few alternatives. Her strikes against the shark's snout targeted one of the few areas where physical contact might influence the predator's behavior, though such tactics carried enormous personal risk. The underwater environment complicated rescue efforts by eliminating the possibility of verbal communication or coordination with surface support. Lena's actions were guided purely by instinct and her determination to save her friend, though her lack of specialized tools or weapons meant that her physical strength was the only resource available for combating a predator that outweighed her by several hundred kilograms. Sasha's defensive movements included vigorous kicking and attempts to push the shark away, using her diving equipment, tactics that may have contributed to the predator's eventual decision to abandon the attack. Great white sharks typically prefer prey that offers minimal resistance, and the combined efforts of both women likely convinced the shark that they represented more trouble than they were worth as potential food sources. The shark's release of Sasha and subsequent retreat into deeper water provided the opportunity for both women to begin their emergency ascent to the surface. Lena's assistance during this critical phase ensured that Sasha maintained proper breathing control despite her injuries and the shock of the encounter. Their training in emergency ascent procedures proved invaluable in avoiding decompression-related complications that could have worsened an already dangerous situation. Surface support personnel responded immediately upon seeing the blood in the water and the distressed condition of both divers. Emergency medical supplies were deployed while radio contact was established with coastal rescue services, though the remote location meant that professional medical care would require considerable time to reach them. Sasha's injuries were severe but not immediately life-threatening, provided that proper wound care could be administered promptly. The boat's return to harbor became a race against time as Sasha's condition required surgical intervention to repair the extensive tissue damage and address potential complications from blood loss. Her survival was attributed to the rapid response of her dive partner and the professional emergency medical care that she received upon reaching shore facilities. Both women required psychological counseling to process the traumatic encounter, though their friendship was strengthened by the experience of surviving such an extreme situation together. Lena's heroic actions became legendary within the diving community, illustrating how courage and quick thinking could overcome seemingly impossible odds in life-threatening emergencies. The incident contributed to ongoing research into great white shark behavior and human-shark interaction protocols, providing valuable data about how these apex predators respond to multiple targets and physical resistance. The attack served as a reminder that even experienced divers face inherent risks when entering the domain of ocean predators that have ruled marine ecosystems for millions of years. Rain had fallen for days across the Louisiana coast, and the rivers had long since spilled into streets, neighborhoods, and bayous, turning entire towns into floating mazes of rooftops, treetops, and broken fences. Helicopters circled low over submerged communities, their blades churning the heavy, humid air as rescue crews worked non-stop to locate stranded families and deliver them to safety. On the fourth day of operations, a United States Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk hovered near a collapsed two-story home surrounded by muddy, debris-choked water. 4 people, a man, a woman, and 2 young children, clung to what was left of a rooftop, waving frantically as the chopper closed in. Inside, Petty Officer Kyle Mason, a rescue swimmer with 10 years of experience, readied himself for a standard vertical insertion. He wore a ballistic flotation vest, a harness rigged to the hoist, and a rescue strap for lifting victims. He had done this dozens of times before through hurricanes, downpours, and gale-force winds. But this water was different. Thick with sediment, oil, and decay, with visibility reduced to almost nothing. What they didn't know, and what no one could have expected, was that dozens of livestock carcasses had been washed into the surrounding bayous after levees failed. Their bloated bodies drifted downstream, attracting predators far inland, including several large bull sharks. Kyle dropped from the helicopter, hitting the warm water with a practiced splash before adjusting his gear and signaling the hoist operator. He began swimming toward the rooftop, careful to avoid floating furniture and jagged boards sticking out of the water like spears. The family looked terrified but alive, soaked and shivering. Kyle moved with steady, deliberate strokes, calling out over the rotor noise and motioning for the man to prepare for lift. He didn't see the shark coming, not through the brown, debris-filled water that clouded everything below the surface. The bull shark had already been in the area for hours, drawn by blood and decay. It was large, over 7 feet, and aggressive, with powerful jaws and an instinct for ambush. When it struck, it came from Kyle's blind side, just beneath the waterline, lunging with force that felt like being hit by a cinder block. Its teeth found the side of his torso, clamping down across his ribs and lower chest in a bone-crunching bite that sent a shock of pain through his entire body. The ballistic vest slowed the impact, keeping the shark from tearing through completely. But it didn't stop the teeth from punching through the side fabric and sinking deep into his skin and muscle. Kyle thrashed once, hard, more out of reflex than strategy, and the shark released, twisting away with a streak of blood trailing behind. He went under for a second, vision flashing black from the impact, lungs burning before breaking the surface again, gasping as he fought to stay upright. Blood was already clouding the water around him, and his ribs felt broken, like his chest had caved in on one side. But through the pain and the panic, his training kicked in. He had people to save, and the chopper couldn't hold position forever. He shouted for the hoist and waved the sling toward the man on the rooftop, keeping his voice steady despite the blood seeping from beneath his vest. One by one, he got the family into the strop. First the children, then the mother, then the father, keeping himself between them and the open water. He scanned the surface constantly, expecting to see that gray torpedo shape circling back, but it never did. Maybe the shark had gone after something else. Maybe it had just been a warning bite. He couldn't afford to think about it. By the time the final lift was complete, Kyle's strength was fading. The wound beneath his vest throbbed with every heartbeat, and warm blood kept slipping through his fingers every time he pressed against his side. He reached for the cable, fumbling with the harness as the crew lowered the extraction basket. His vision blurred and the chopper's shape seemed to tilt as he tried to focus on the spinning blades above. When he finally collapsed into the basket, he barely felt the lift. Everything hurt, and his thoughts were starting to drift. But he knew the family was safe. That was all that mattered. On board, the flight medic tore open his vest and exposed the wounds. Deep punctures along the ribs, one broken with torn muscle and blood pooling fast. The medic applied pressure and injected a coagulant wrapping gauze around Kyle's torso, while radioing ahead to the emergency trauma team waiting back at base. The pilot pushed the throttle hard, flying low and fast through the rain, while the crew sat in silence, watching their teammate fight to stay conscious. Doctors later said that if the shark had bitten even an inch higher, the teeth would have severed arteries near the heart. Kyle had come within minutes of dying but survived thanks to fast care, his vest, and what they called unshakable resolve under extreme pressure. He spent weeks in recovery, undergoing surgery for the rib and muscle damage, then physical therapy to restore function to his side. He had permanent scarring and chronic pain, but he never once regretted the jump. The Coast Guard launched a full review of the operation. While they had dealt with alligator threats in flooded regions before, the idea of bull sharks moving that far inland during floods hadn't been considered in operational planning. New protocols were introduced within months, requiring sonar sweeps for submerged threats in brackish waters, and more protective gear for swimmers entering flood zones with known animal activity. Some missions were adjusted to rely more on hoist rescues from rooftops only, minimizing time in the water. Kyle Mason returned to active duty less than a year later, though he carried the memory of that bite every time he zipped up his vest. He knew how close it had been, how 1 second of surprise, one bad angle could have ended his life. But he also remembered the 4 people clinging to that rooftop, and the fact that they were alive because he didn't stop swimming. For him, that was worth every scar the water left behind. The sun was just beginning to warm the waters of False Bay on a clear June morning, as Peter Van Rooyen prepared for what was meant to be one last long training swim before the charity crossing scheduled for later that month. At 46 years old, Peter was a seasoned open-water swimmer who had spent countless hours in South Africa's oceans, braving cold currents, jellyfish, and rough waves to prepare for races and fundraisers that raised money for local causes. It was his favorite spot to train alone, a place where the bay's calm waters and mild visibility made for ideal conditions to work on endurance and technique. On this particular morning, the sea was almost glassy, with only a slight ripple from the gentle breeze and faint underwater currents flowing toward the shore. Peter entered the water at first light, stretching his arms and legs and then pushing off from the sandy beach with a smooth, practiced stroke. His goal was a 3.5-kilometer swim around the point and back, a route that had become routine but still challenging enough to keep his focus sharp. With his wetsuit hugging his frame and a bright orange swim cap marking his position, Peter set a steady pace, his breath slow and rhythmic as his body sliced through the cool water. Nearby, a friend and kayak escort named Johan followed at a cautious distance, keeping an eye on the swimmer and the horizon for any signs of trouble. The waters were known for seals, occasional dolphins, and of course, the great white sharks that inhabited the bay. Local authorities had recently increased patrols and installed shark spotters along the coastline to warn swimmers and surfers, but Peter trusted his own experience and the kayak escort to keep him safe. About 40 minutes into his swim, Peter was roughly 250 meters from shore, midway through his last lap. The morning light glinted off the surface as he turned his head to breathe, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Suddenly, without warning, a massive shadow moved swiftly from behind, cutting through the water like a torpedo. Peter felt a violent, searing pain as something slammed into his left shoulder and upper back with overwhelming force. The great white shark had struck, its powerful jaws clamping down on muscle and wetsuit, tearing through fabric and flesh in a snap that echoed beneath the surface. Peter's body instinctively jerked forward as the shark released, retreating into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. The sharp, crushing bite had missed major arteries, but left deep lacerations and torn muscle that sent waves of burning pain radiating through his left side. Blood began to seep into the water, mixing with the sea's cold current and drawing Johan's immediate attention. From his kayak, Johan saw the sudden splash and turbulent swirl, then heard Peter's sharp cries. Without hesitation, he paddled hard toward the swimmer, calling out over the water and pulling him onto the kayak as Peter's strength faltered. Despite the heavy bleeding from the bite wounds, Peter remained conscious, his breathing rapid but controlled as Johan applied pressure to slow the blood flow. The kayak bobbed gently in the bay's mild swell, carrying them quickly back toward the shore where emergency crews had been alerted by the escort's radio call. Paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, carefully transferring Peter onto a stretcher and rushing him to a trauma center, a short drive away. In the emergency room, surgeons worked rapidly to assess and repair the damage. The bite had ripped a jagged gash across Peter's shoulder blade and upper back, muscles shredded and skin hanging loose. Over 60 stitches were required to close the wounds, and a skin graft was performed to replace tissue that was too badly damaged to heal naturally. The doctors confirmed that, although the injuries were severe, Peter was incredibly fortunate that no major arteries or nerves had been severed, a difference between life and death measured in millimeters. News of the attack spread quickly through the local swimming and surfing communities, sending shockwaves of concern and sympathy. The area was famous for its marine life, including a robust population of seals that attracted great white sharks, but attacks on swimmers were rare. Authorities reiterated the importance of shark spotters, early warning systems, and safe swimming protocols to minimize risk, while local groups called for increased monitoring of seal colonies and public education on how to behave in shark country. Peter, once stabilized and recovered, spoke publicly about the incident. He expressed gratitude for the quick response of his kayak escort and emergency crews, crediting their skill and calm for saving his life. Despite the trauma, he stated clearly that he would not return to open water training, having made the difficult decision to prioritize his family and health over the sport he loved. However, he remained a vocal supporter of ongoing shark awareness programs and encouraged swimmers and athletes to respect the ocean's power, while taking all possible precautions. The incident left a permanent mark on Peter's life, physically through the scars that traced his back and shoulder, and emotionally in the cautious way he now approached the sea. Friends and fellow swimmers visited regularly, helping him adapt to limitations during his recovery and reminding him of his strength and resilience. Though he would never again race through the cold, blue waters of False Bay, Peter's story became a reminder to the community that even the calmest morning could turn dangerous in an instant, that the ocean held both beauty and risk, and that respect for nature's predators was not optional but essential. Months later, when the charity swim went ahead with safety protocols heightened and additional escorts in place, Peter watched from the shore, proud of the community's resolve but certain his last lap had been final. The shark that had struck him remained a silent presence beneath the waves, an ancient predator whose role in the bay's ecosystem was undeniable, even if it came at a human cost. Lucas Newman was a 29-year-old diver from Germany who had spent years chasing underwater adventures across the globe. He had recently joined a live-aboard trip in the Red Sea, near the famed Elphinstone Reef, a site known for its vibrant coral formations, diverse marine life, and the occasional appearance of large pelagic predators. The group planned a series of drift dives, drifting with the currents over deep walls, enjoying the warm water and clear visibility. For Lucas, this trip was a chance to explore one of the world's premier dive destinations, while sharing the experience with fellow enthusiasts from several countries. On the third day of the trip, after a successful morning dive, the crew prepared for a routine drift dive off the reef. Lucas entered the water last, following the dive master's signal, and began the slow, controlled drift along the coral wall. The currents were stronger than expected, pushing the divers steadily southward and making it difficult to maintain group cohesion. Despite careful planning, Lucas found himself separated from the others as he followed a school of fusiliers into a small overhang. When he surfaced near the prearranged pickup zone, he realized that the boat was nowhere in sight. Floating on his back, Lucas inflated his surface marker buoy to signal his position and began scanning the horizon for the live-aboard's bright yellow hull. Minutes passed as the currents continued to tug him away from the reef and the main group. Alone on the vast blue surface, Lucas felt the first twinge of unease. The surface marker buoy bobbed beside him, a small orange beacon in the endless water. Time stretched and he checked his dive watch. Nearly 40 minutes had passed and still the boat had not returned. Unbeknownst to Lucas, an oceanic white-tip shark had been drawn toward the unusual scene. The Red Sea was home to a variety of sharks, but the oceanic white-tip was notorious for its boldness and curiosity. Known for its broad, rounded fins and white tips, this species was often found in open waters and had been involved in several documented encounters with divers and shipwreck survivors. The shark circled silently beneath the surface, its steady presence unnoticed at first by Lucas. At first, the shark seemed merely curious, making several slow, cautious passes around Lucas and the floating surface marker buoy. Lucas stayed perfectly still, aware that sudden movements might provoke aggression. His mind raced with thoughts of safety and survival, instincts sharpening with every passing moment. The oceanic white-tip, growing bolder, moved closer, its dark eyes fixed on the lone diver. Lucas noticed the distinctive white tips cutting through the water, and his heart pounded harder. Suddenly, the shark lunged, striking Lucas's left forearm with a powerful bite. The force jolted Lucas violently, pain erupting as the shark's teeth punctured deep into his wetsuit and flesh. The shark pulled briefly, twisting its head as it tried to seize the limb, before releasing and retreating. Blood seeped from the wound, mixing with the water, creating a crimson halo around Lucas's arm. Despite the pain and shock, Lucas fought the instinct to thrash and instead focused on keeping calm. He managed to lift his injured arm above the water, preventing further bleeding into the sea while simultaneously inflating his buoyancy vest, making himself more visible to the crew still searching for him. His breaths came fast but steady, eyes darting to the distant horizon for any sign of rescue. The shark circled once more, assessing its potential prey, before finally turning away and disappearing into the blue depths. Lucas's mind remained locked on survival, every muscle tense but controlled. 10 minutes later, the dive boat's crew spotted the bright orange surface marker buoy bobbing against the waves and rapidly maneuvered toward Lucas's position. They hauled him aboard quickly, noting the deep puncture wounds on his forearm and the pale shock on his face. A tourniquet was applied immediately to stem the bleeding, while one crew member called ahead to a hospital to prepare for emergency treatment. Lucas's fingers trembled as he clutched the bleeding arm, grateful but exhausted. At the hospital, surgeons examined the bite wounds closely, noting the sharp punctures and torn skin that would require thorough cleaning to prevent infection. The doctors explained that oceanic white-tip bites were rare, but could be severe due to the shark's powerful jaws and sharp teeth. They suggested that the shark's curiosity might have been triggered by Lucas's flailing, the bright colors of his dive gear, or the surface marker buoy, all unusual sights in the shark's territory. After meticulous cleaning and stitching of the wounds, Lucas was given antibiotics and a tetanus shot, then monitored for signs of infection or complications. In the weeks following the attack, Lucas underwent physical therapy to regain full movement and strength in his arm. The scars from the bite were a constant reminder of the event, but he was determined to make a full recovery. Psychologically, however, Lucas faced new challenges: anxiety and lingering panic attacks whenever he returned to the water alone or faced strong currents. His confidence as a diver had been shaken, replaced by a cautious respect for the ocean's unpredictability and the creatures that called it home. Despite the trauma, Lucas refused to abandon his passion. He spoke openly about his experience to other divers, emphasizing the importance of safety protocols such as staying close to the group, deploying surface markers promptly, and avoiding sudden movements if approached by wildlife. He also advocated for continued research into shark behavior to improve diver safety and reduce misunderstandings that could lead to attacks. His story served as a cautionary tale, but also as a testament to survival and resilience. The oceanic white-tipped shark, meanwhile, continued to patrol the open waters of the Red Sea, an apex predator perfectly adapted to its environment. Though feared by many, the shark played a crucial role in maintaining the balance of marine ecosystems, and most encounters with humans ended without incident. Lucas's attack was a rare and unfortunate event, highlighting the delicate dance between humans and nature beneath the waves, a dance that required respect, knowledge, and sometimes a bit of luck. Months after the incident, Lucas returned to diving with a new perspective. He chose shallower, more sheltered sites with friends and guides he trusted, rebuilding his confidence stroke by stroke. The Red Sea remained one of his favorite destinations, not just for its stunning beauty, but for the lessons it had taught him about vulnerability, courage, and the enduring power of the sea. Lucas knew that the ocean would always hold risks, but it would also offer rewards for those willing to approach with care and humility. The glass-bottom boat moved slowly over the deep blue water near Gansby, South Africa, drifting lazily above one of Earth's most notorious great white shark feeding zones. It was a warm, windless morning, and the sea was unusually calm. The clear water below revealed the haunting beauty of the ocean floor and the flickers of shadow that moved like ghosts beneath the surface. 6 Russians were among the 12 tourists on board, part of a package tour that promised sightings of massive sharks in their natural environment. Victor, a retired engineer in his late 60s, fond of wildlife photography, stood near the front with his wife Irina, who kept clutching his arm nervously. Nearby, a younger couple, Alexei and Tatiana, both in their early 30s and on their honeymoon, took photos through the scratched glass panels beneath their feet. The boat's crew consisted of 2 local guides and the captain, who had over 20 years of experience navigating these waters. The ship was sleek but light, with reinforced glass flooring that allowed passengers to peer into the sea. It had been inspected, certified, and cleared for shark tours just weeks before. No one expected what would happen next. Just before noon, the sea around the boat changed. The clear water darkened as shadows began to form below the hull. The captain eased the motor down, letting the ship drift naturally. The tourists leaned over the railing or stared down through the glass, eager for their first real look at the sharks. Then came the ripple. A massive shape surged upward from the depths, a pale underbelly followed by a dark back and wide tail, and in a violent flash, a huge great white shark erupted from the water, slamming its full weight into the starboard side of the boat. The impact was thunderous. Glass shattered. People screamed and fell to the deck. Water sprayed over the side and flooded across the cracked panels. One of the tourists, a young Russian named Andrei, lost his footing and slid across the slick surface. His hands clawed at the rail but found only wet fiberglass. A second hit from the shark shook the boat again, and Andrei was flung overboard, disappearing into the churning water. Panic broke loose. Victor tried to pull Irina to her feet as another crack opened along the floor. The boat tilted slightly, taking on water quickly. Some passengers clung to railings or each other, while others scrambled for life jackets. The crew shouted instructions, but they were drowned by fear and the rising sound of chaos. Then came a scream, short, sharp, and cut off too soon, as Alexei slipped through a shattered section of the side rail. He hit the water hard, and within seconds, a trail of red spread around him. The shark, a giant male estimated at over 17 feet, moved with terrible speed. Its jaws closed around Alexei's torso and pulled him under before he could scream again. Blood surged to the surface in a thick cloud. Still on the deck, Tatiana reached for him but was pulled by the sudden motion of the boat. She crashed into a bench and rolled toward the broken edge. Her leg slipped through a jagged gap, and she tried to scream, but her voice cracked with fear. Before anyone could help her, a second shark emerged, smaller but no less lethal. It lunged at her leg, and in an instant she was gone too, yanked over the side with a splash and a trail of blood that turned the sea crimson. The remaining passengers scrambled toward the boat's center, where the damage was least. Water rose rapidly through the floor, gushing up between broken panels. One man, bleeding from a cut to his arm, held tightly to the railing as he watched the water turn thick with red foam and moving shadows. The captain radioed for help, his voice shaking, urging the Coast Guard to hurry. He yelled to his crew to distribute the remaining life jackets. They worked quickly, helping injured passengers cling to debris or intact hull sections. Victor held onto Irina, both soaked and trembling. He watched the blood in the water and the sleek fins slicing through the waves. The shark circled, as if waiting for the boat to tip further. One of them slammed its head against the hull again, testing its strength. Some tourists tried to use broken seats and benches to patch holes in the flooring, but water kept coming in. The boat wasn't sinking fast but steadily. Its engine was dead, and its radio barely worked. Rescue boats arrived 20 minutes later, alerted by the captain's broken transmission and the GPS distress signal. When they reached the scene, the rescuers found the water stained red and the boat dangerously low in the sea. The surviving tourists were pulled from the deck one by one. Some were crying and others were too shocked to speak. 3 bodies were missing. The sharks had vanished by then, disappearing into the deep just as quickly as they had come. Victor was the last to leave the boat. He clutched a piece of torn cloth soaked in blood. Irina had lost her shoes and part of her sleeve in the chaos, but she survived. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she gripped the side of the rescue boat. In the aftermath, marine officials studied the damaged vessel. They found that although the glass bottom had been rated for wildlife viewing, it had not been designed to withstand full-force breaches by massive sharks. There had been no secondary containment layer, steel mesh or safety railing bolted with ocean-grade fittings. Every flaw had been exposed in seconds. 3 lives were lost. Their bodies were never recovered. The company suspended all glass-bottom tours immediately. Authorities cited design vulnerabilities and inadequate emergency protocols. But in Gansbai, known for its great whites, many locals believed something deeper had gone wrong. The sea had given its warning, and no glass, no matter how clear, could ever protect against a predator built by nature to dominate. The morning off Praslin Island had been nearly perfect. Clear skies, warm water, and visibility that stretched for meters below the surface. Alain, 33, tall and athletic with a calm, patient presence, had been working as a marine guide in the Seychelles for nearly 8 years. He had led countless snorkeling excursions, guiding guests through coral gardens and fish-rich shallows. This particular outing had gone smoothly. The current was gentle, and the group of 7 tourists, mostly European honeymooners, had followed instructions well. They were just finishing their final swim of the day. The catamaran drifted nearby, anchored in a calm cove. Alain floated a few meters from the group, scanning the water beneath them with the casual alertness of experience. The coral reef below shimmered with darting fish, and everything felt exactly as it should for a few moments, peaceful and predictable. Then, he saw it. A large, slow-moving but deliberate shape emerged from the blue beyond the reef's drop-off. At first, it was just a shadow, broad and gliding, but sunlight revealed the tiger-like stripes running down its side as it turned. A tiger shark, at least 4 meters long, circled slowly beneath the group. Alain's pulse quickened. He raised one arm calmly, signaling the snorkelers to swim back to the boat. Most didn't understand the urgency, but they followed his gesture. He remained where he was, treading water, watching the shark as it moved closer. His training had taught him that tiger sharks were curious, sometimes bold, but rarely aggressive without cause. Still, he wasn't taking chances. He locked his eyes on the shark, staying between it and the group as they kicked toward the boat's ladder. The shark dipped beneath him, briefly disappearing, then reappeared farther off, circling wide. Alain kept his breathing steady and legs still, hoping the shark would lose interest. But it didn't. Without warning, it surged upward with terrifying speed. One moment it glided, the next it was a blur of muscle and jaws. It struck from below, its snout ramming into Alain's lower back, and then its jaws opened wide and clamped around his torso. The force of the bite knocked the air from his lungs, and blood gushed instantly into the water as the shark twisted its body and dragged him under. The tourists screamed, kicking frantically toward the ladder. One woman dropped her mask and nearly slipped off the steps. The water around Alain turned crimson, and for a moment he was gone, swallowed by the depths in a flurry of red. The second guide on the boat, Benoit, had been monitoring from the deck. He acted without hesitation when he saw the blood bloom beneath the surface and Alain disappear. He grabbed the long aluminum pole spear kept for emergencies and dove in, slashing through the surface and descending fast. He spotted the shark just below, circling again. Alain floated limply in the water, drifting upward slowly, his torso torn and limp. Benoit swam straight at the predator, jabbing the spear in its direction. The shark flinched but didn't immediately leave. It hovered for a moment, its dark eyes fixed on the motion, then flicked its tail and vanished into deeper water. Benoit reached Alain's body and wrapped an arm around his chest, hauling him up. The sea was thick with blood. The guests had returned to the boat, pale and shaking, several in tears. As Benoit lifted Alain onto the swim platform, the extent of the injuries became clear. The shark's bite had torn through his lower ribs, splitting flesh and bone. His abdomen was mangled. His face was pale, eyes open but unfocused, unmoving. Benoit started chest compressions as the captain radioed for emergency assistance, but it was no use. Alain had been underwater too long. His heart had stopped. His blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, Alain's body had already been covered with a towel. Authorities arrived within an hour and began interviewing the shaken guests. The attack had occurred in an area known for occasional shark sightings, but this was different. There had been no baiting, no chumming, no provocation. It was a clear water, broad daylight strike on a human floating in the ocean. Marine biologists investigated and found evidence of fish scraps dumped from fishing boats earlier that morning not far from the reef. While not directly tied to the attack, it raised new concerns. Tiger sharks were opportunistic and had been known to associate certain areas with feeding. Alain was likely in the wrong place at the wrong moment, mistaken for prey in water, where recent feeding may have heightened the shark's aggression. His death marked the second fatal shark attack in that part of the Seychelles in under a year. The local government reacted quickly, closing nearby beaches for a week and suspending all snorkeling and diving tours around Praslin. Tour operators were ordered to reassess their safety protocols, including improved wildlife monitoring, stricter waste disposal regulations, and better emergency training for guides. Alain's death shook the close-knit community of marine workers. He had been respected, known for his steady nature and deep understanding of the sea. Tourists often praised him for making them feel safe in the open water. His final act, staying behind to protect his group, was seen as both heroic and tragic. 2 days later, a memorial was held on the beach. Locals and guests lit candles and placed flowers in the sand. Some threw wreaths into the surf. Others stood silently, staring out at the horizon. The ocean that had taken Alain was still and calm again, as if nothing had happened. But it had. In the days that followed, conversations began to change. Guides spoke more openly about close encounters. Tourists asked harder questions. Safety, once assumed, was now actively reassessed. Alain had trusted the water, known its moods, and respected its risks, but the sea didn't reason. The tiger shark that took him hadn't acted out of malice. It had simply followed instinct. And in a place that looked like paradise, that reminder cut deep. The waters off Baja California were deceptively calm that morning. The sea painted glassy blue under a rising sun. Lucia had always loved these quiet hours, when the ocean was still, and the only sounds were soft waves lapping against the hull and distant seabirds crying over the horizon. At 31, she was already a respected marine ecologist from Spain, with nearly a decade of fieldwork behind her. She had dived with orcas, tagged manta rays, and swum among whales. But this was different. This was solitude. The research team had anchored near a deep-water buoy, one of several scattered along the migratory corridor used by humpbacks. Their modest but well-equipped vessel was home base for a 2-week expedition that recorded whale song, tracked surface movement, and monitored plankton blooms in the channel's upwellings. Lucia, ever dedicated, rose early that day. She wanted to recalibrate an acoustic sensor tethered to the buoy before the winds picked up. No one else was awake when she lowered herself quietly into the water with mask and fins, towing a waterproof notepad and small toolkit. Her movements were careful, practiced, and confident. The buoy was positioned just above the edge of a submarine canyon that dropped steeply into colder, deeper water, a place rich with prey and known, though rarely spoken of directly, as an occasional hunting ground for large predators. Lucia was aware of the risks. She had read the local briefings, reviewed migration data, and listened to accounts of divers who had seen shadows slipping below them just out of view. Still, the water felt safe in the quiet of early morning. With visibility stretching dozens of meters, she worked beneath the buoy, tightening a loose sensor bracket, noting small corrosion patches, and marking calibration values. It was simple and routine, and she moved slowly as she adjusted her orientation. She floated just under the surface, the lines from the buoy occasionally brushing against her arm. What she didn't notice was how far she had drifted. The current had gently pulled her away from the shallow shelf and over the canyon lip. The water darkened below her, turning from turquoise to an inkier shade of blue. Somewhere deep in that darkness, a shadow rose. It was a great white female, nearly 4 meters long. It had likely been patrolling the edge of the drop-off, drawn closer by the rhythmic splashing near the buoy. The silhouette of Lucia's body above, combined with the shadow of the floating structure, resembled a distressed animal, perhaps a seal or injured fish. She didn't hear it approach. Only a sudden and sharp scream echoed across the water just once. Her colleagues, still half asleep aboard the nearby vessel, jolted upright. 2 rushed onto the deck and scanned the surface. For a few seconds there was nothing, just empty water and the quiet bobbing of the buoy. Then something red. Lucia's body surfaced near the buoy, floating awkwardly. One fin still on her right foot, arms drifting loosely beside her. Her left leg was gone above the knee, torn away entirely. The left side of her back bore deep, ragged gashes, flesh stripped down to exposed ribs. The team launched the skiff and retrieved her within minutes, but she was already dead. The blood loss had been massive. One of the researchers, shaking, flew a drone to scan the surrounding area. Within seconds, it captured footage of a large shark circling lazily beneath the buoy, its body smooth and pale beneath the surface sheen. The animal was slow now, having already delivered its strike and withdrawn. It showed no fear, no urgency, just silent dominance in its domain. The team reported the incident immediately. Authorities, journalists, and marine biologists from the mainland arrived by helicopter within hours. The footage was reviewed. Based on the bite pattern, footage, and local movement data, the shark was identified as a mature female great white, known to patrol the deeper sections of the trench during peak feeding times. Lucia had not been wearing a shark deterrent, though several were available on board. The device, a simple magnetic field emitter, was standard protocol for deeper excursions, but she had considered her snorkel near the buoy low risk. She had also gone alone, something typically discouraged during offshore work even in familiar waters. The Mexican scientific community was shaken. Lucia was not just another name on a list. She had been a rising figure in marine biology, respected for her field discipline and known for her cautious approach. But even caution had limits. The fact that the attack happened near a monitored buoy raised troubling questions. Did the buoy attract prey that lured the shark closer? Did its shadow confuse the predator into thinking it was an injured animal hiding beneath? Was the water simply too deep for comfort, too close to the hunting ground, too far from the protective rhythms of the surface pods? A week later, her body was flown back to Spain, escorted by 2 colleagues who had worked closely with her on whale tagging projects. A memorial was held at her home institute, where students and mentors spoke about her passion for the sea, her calm under pressure, and her relentless drive to understand the creatures she loved. Back in Baja, the team removed the buoy. Further dives in the canyon zone were indefinitely suspended, and new regulations were drafted mandating paired excursions and mandatory deterrent use during solo tasks, no matter how shallow. The attack did not diminish Lucia's legacy, but altered how others approached the sea. For all her knowledge, she had become part of the very food chain she studied, and that cold truth hung over every diver who later entered those same waters, reminding them that even the most experienced could be mistaken for prey. In time, the ocean grew quiet again. The winds returned, the whales resumed their migrations, and the sharks kept to their patterns. But under the surface, where shadows move without sound, Lucia's story remained, a solemn echo of risk, reverence, and the ever-thin line between study and survival. Pristine waters along the Mozambique coast have long been regarded as one of the Indian Ocean's hidden gems. Located in the Inhambane province, this coastal stretch attracts wealthy adventurers seeking untouched marine experiences far from the crowded dive spots of the Caribbean or Mediterranean. The area's history as a trading post had given way to modern ecotourism, though the remote location meant rescue services remained limited. Local fishermen had reported increased shark activity in recent months, attributing it to seasonal migrations and an abundance of reef fish drawn to the area's protected coral systems. Larisa Korolenko had built her fortune in Ukraine's burgeoning tech sector, developing software solutions for Eastern European markets. At 34, she possessed both the wealth and adventurous spirit that led her to commission custom diving equipment from a German manufacturer specializing in high-end underwater gear. Her birthday celebration in 2015 was planned as an intimate affair aboard the luxury yacht Meridian's Dream, accompanied only by her dive instructor and a small crew. The vessel had anchored approximately 3 nautical miles from shore, positioning itself above a reef system known locally for its biodiversity. The custom dive suit that Larisa wore represented the pinnacle of underwater technology. Manufactured by a boutique German company, the suit incorporated reflective thermal panels designed to regulate body temperature in varying water conditions. Embedded biometric sensors monitored vital signs and transmitted data to surface equipment, while the suit's unique fabric blend promised enhanced mobility and protection. The metallic threading woven throughout the material created an almost iridescent appearance underwater, intended to blend with the natural play of light filtering through the ocean depths. Her dive partner, a seasoned instructor named Marcus Hoffman, had expressed mild reservations about the suit's reflective properties. He mentioned that certain marine predators might be attracted to unusual visual stimuli, though he acknowledged that no documented incidents had occurred with similar equipment. The morning dive had been planned to explore a reef wall that dropped approximately 60 meters into deeper waters, an area known for its population of large pelagic species. The descent began routinely at approximately 10:30 in the morning. Larisa demonstrated excellent buoyancy control as she followed Marcus toward the reef wall, her movements graceful despite the suit's bulk. The water visibility exceeded 25 meters, revealing the vibrant ecosystem that made this location so prized among serious divers. Schools of yellowfin tuna moved in coordinated formations while reef sharks patrolled the deeper waters beyond the coral formations. Marcus later reported that the attack occurred without warning at a depth of approximately 40 meters. The great white shark, estimated at nearly 5 meters in length, approached from the murky waters beyond the reef wall. Its initial strike came from below, a behavior consistent with the species' typical hunting pattern. The shark's massive jaws clamped around Larisa's torso with crushing force, the impact so violent that Marcus felt the pressure wave through the water. The suit's advanced materials provided no protection against the shark's bite force, which marine biologists estimate can exceed 2 tons per square inch. The reflective panels that had cost thousands to develop were shredded instantly, while the biometric sensors transmitted a brief burst of alarming data before the system failed. Marcus watched in horror as the shark's powerful tail drove both predator and victim deeper into the water column. His training dictated that he maintain visual contact while signaling the surface support team, but the shark's erratic movements made this impossible. The great white appeared to be testing its grip, shaking Larisa violently before adjusting its hold. Marcus later described the scene as surreal, noting how the suit's torn reflective elements created an almost strobe-like effect as they caught fragments of sunlight filtering down from above. The surface crew responded within minutes of receiving Marcus's emergency signal. The yacht's captain, experienced in coordinating diving operations, initiated search protocols while radio contact was established with Mozambican Coast Guard authorities. However, the remote location meant that professional rescue resources were hours away, leaving the yacht crew to conduct their own recovery efforts. Marcus remained underwater for nearly 20 minutes, following standard search patterns while monitoring his air supply carefully. He discovered sections of the destroyed suit floating at various depths, along with pieces of the sophisticated equipment that had been integrated into its design. The biometric monitoring device continued to transmit intermittent signals for several minutes after the attack, though the data it provided painted a grim picture of the victim's condition. Recovery efforts continued throughout the day, with local fishing boats joining the search operation. Larisa's body was never found, though additional fragments of her equipment were located scattered across a wide area of the seafloor. The pattern of debris suggested that the shark had carried its victim significant distances from the initial attack site. The incident prompted discussions within the diving community about the potential risks associated with highly reflective underwater equipment. Marine biologists noted that great white sharks are known to investigate unusual visual stimuli, particularly objects that might resemble their natural prey. The tragedy served as a stark reminder that even the most advanced technology cannot eliminate the inherent risks of entering the ocean's apex predator's domain. Larissa's family established a memorial fund supporting marine conservation efforts in Mozambique, though they declined to pursue legal action against the equipment manufacturer. The incident remains one of the few documented cases involving designer diving equipment and shark attacks, highlighting the unpredictable nature of human-wildlife encounters in marine environments. The river system in Australia's Northern Territory had been shaped by centuries of seasonal flooding, creating a complex network of waterways that connected the interior wetlands to the Timor Sea. Located approximately 60 kilometers east of Darwin, this river system served as a critical habitat for numerous species, adapted to the dramatic seasonal changes between wet and dry periods. The area's Aboriginal communities had long understood the river's dual nature, respecting both its life-giving properties and its capacity for sudden violence during the monsoon season. European settlement in the 1800s had brought cattle stations and small fishing communities, though the remote location meant that modern emergency services remained hours away from many riverside settlements. In 2019, Cyclone Marcus had produced unprecedented rainfall across the top end, swelling rivers beyond their normal boundaries and pushing marine species far inland from their typical coastal habitats. The flooding had been particularly severe along the river, where traditional fishing grounds had been transformed into turbulent channels carrying debris and displaced wildlife. Local indigenous elders had warned that unusual conditions might bring unexpected dangers, though their concerns were often dismissed by newer residents unfamiliar with the river's history. Jara Marlowe had operated his fishing enterprise along the river for nearly 15 years, building a modest living by supplying fresh barramundi to Darwin's restaurant trade. At 43, he possessed the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades working under the harsh Northern Territory sun. His knowledge of the river's seasonal patterns had been gained through experience, rather than formal education, though his instincts for reading water conditions had proven remarkably accurate over the years. His daughter accompanied him on many fishing expeditions, learning the skills that had sustained their family for generations. The morning of the attack began with routine checks of the fish traps that Jara had positioned along the river's edge. These traditional-style enclosures, constructed from wire mesh and timber frames, were designed to capture fish during their feeding movements while allowing smaller species to escape. The recent flooding had displaced many of his traps, requiring careful repositioning to ensure they remained effective while complying with local fishing regulations. Water levels remained elevated from the recent cyclone, with murky brown currents carrying sediment and organic matter from the flooded interior regions. Visibility beneath the surface was virtually zero, creating conditions that made it impossible to observe underwater hazards or wildlife movement. The usual clear demarcation between saltwater and freshwater had been eliminated by the massive freshwater influx, allowing marine species to venture much further upstream than normal circumstances would permit. Jara had waited approximately 30 meters from shore to adjust a trap that had been twisted by the current when the bull shark struck without warning. The species possessed a unique physiological adaptation, allowing it to survive in both saltwater and freshwater environments. The flooding had created ideal conditions for these sharks to move upstream in search of prey, following the scent trails of distressed fish and other marine life displaced by the cyclone. The initial bite targeted Jara's lower leg just below the knee, the shark's powerful jaws clamping down with crushing force that immediately severed muscle tissue and fractured bone. Bull sharks are known for their aggressive nature and reluctance to release prey once they have committed to an attack, characteristics that made Jara's situation particularly desperate. The muddy water concealed the extent of his injuries, while making it impossible for him to see his attacker or anticipate its next movement. His daughter, who had been collecting baitfish near the riverbank, witnessed her father's sudden distress as he began thrashing in the water approximately 50 meters away. His calls for help echoed across the water, though the remote location meant that immediate assistance was unlikely. The bull shark maintained its grip while attempting to drag Jara into deeper water. a behavior consistent with the species' hunting strategy of drowning terrestrial prey that ventures too close to the water's edge. Several local fishermen who had been working downstream heard Jara's distress calls and responded immediately, though reaching his position required navigating the swollen river's dangerous currents. The rescue effort was complicated by the need to approach carefully without provoking the shark into a more violent attack, while simultaneously dealing with the possibility that other bull sharks might be present in the area. The men used long wooden poles to strike at the water around Jara, while creating as much noise and disturbance as possible, tactics that eventually convinced the bull shark to release its grip and retreat into the deeper channel. Jara was pulled to safety with severe lacerations and puncture wounds that required immediate medical attention, though the remote location meant that proper surgical facilities were hours away by road. Emergency medical services transported Jara to a medical facility, where surgeons worked to repair the extensive tissue damage and address potential infection from bacteria present in the river water. His recovery required multiple operations and months of rehabilitation, during which time he was forced to abandon his fishing activities and find alternative sources of income. The attack highlighted the unexpected consequences of extreme weather events on wildlife behavior and human safety. Marine biologists noted that cyclone-driven flooding had created unprecedented conditions that allowed bull sharks to penetrate far upstream from their normal coastal habitats. Local authorities issued warnings about increased shark activity in freshwater areas, though many residents remained skeptical about the presence of marine predators in traditionally safe inland waters. Jara's experience became a cautionary tale within the fishing community, illustrating how climate-related events could rapidly alter familiar environments and introduce new hazards. His survival was attributed to the quick response of fellow fishermen and his own determination to fight back against the attack, though the physical and psychological scars remained permanent reminders of the encounter. The incident contributed to ongoing research into bull shark behavior and habitat utilization, providing valuable data about how these adaptable predators respond to environmental changes. Jara eventually returned to limited fishing activities, though he never again ventured into the water without multiple safety measures and constant vigilance for signs of marine predators in what had once been considered safe freshwater territory. The vast reef system off northeastern Australia is one of the world's most biodiverse marine ecosystems, stretching over 2,000 kilometers along the coastline. A well-known dive site located about 40 kilometers from a major coastal city has earned a reputation among underwater photographers for its exceptional visibility and dense populations of tropical fish. The area's position at the convergence of several ocean currents created unique conditions that supported both coral growth and the larger predatory species that fed on the abundant marine life. However, rising water temperatures and increased human activity had begun to stress the ecosystem, leading to unpredictable changes in animal behavior patterns. Elena Corson had established her reputation as a marine photographer through nearly a decade of documenting coral reef ecosystems across the Indo-Pacific region. Her work had been featured in numerous scientific publications and conservation magazines, earning recognition for both its artistic merit and educational value. At 36, she possessed the technical diving skills and patience required to capture images of rare species that typically avoided human presence. Her specialty involved photographing fish behavior during feeding and spawning activities, work that required spending extended periods underwater in close proximity to marine life. In 2016, Elena had been commissioned by a marine conservation organization to document the health of coral systems around Coral Point, with particular emphasis on species that served as indicators of ecosystem stability. The assignment required multiple deep dives over several days, during which she would photograph specific fish species and coral formations that had been selected for long-term monitoring purposes. Her equipment included underwater cameras capable of capturing high-resolution images in low-light conditions, along with specialized lighting systems designed to minimize disturbance to marine life. The morning of her final dive began with weather conditions that were ideal for underwater photography. Surface winds were minimal, creating calm conditions that would allow for stable boat positioning and safe diving operations. Water temperature registered 24 degrees Celsius, warm enough to permit extended underwater periods without excessive thermal protection. Visibility exceeded 30 meters, providing the clear water conditions essential for capturing the detailed images required by her conservation clients. Elena's dive plan called for a solo descent to approximately 25 meters, where she intended to photograph a rare species of angelfish that had been observed in the area during previous surveys. Solo diving represented a calculated risk that many underwater photographers accepted to avoid disturbing wildlife with the presence of multiple divers. Her safety protocols included surface communication equipment and emergency ascent procedures, though the remote location meant that rescue resources were limited. The target species, known for its elusive nature and specific habitat requirements, had been spotted near a coral formation that provided both shelter and feeding opportunities. Elena's approach required careful positioning to capture the fish in its natural environment without causing it to flee to deeper water, where photography would become impossible. Her technique involved remaining motionless for extended periods while waiting for the ideal moment to activate her camera system. The tiger shark that killed Elena had likely been attracted to the area by the scent of fish blood and organic matter stirred up by her photographic activities. Tiger sharks are known as opportunistic predators with less specialized feeding habits than great whites, making them more likely to investigate unusual underwater disturbances. The species typically hunt during daylight hours in shallow reef environments, characteristics that placed Elena directly in the path of a hunting predator. Her dive buddy, photographer James Mitchell, had remained on the surface to monitor safety protocols and maintain communication with their support vessel. His position allowed him to observe Elena's general location through the clear water, though the specific details of her photographic work were obscured by depth and the coral formations where she was operating. The attack occurred suddenly, with the tiger shark approaching from Elena's blind spot while she was focused on capturing images of the angelfish. The shark's initial strike targeted Elena's torso and thigh, its powerful jaws inflicting massive trauma that would have caused rapid blood loss and shock. Tiger sharks possess serrated teeth designed for cutting through tough materials, making their attacks particularly devastating to human victims. The predator's behavior suggested a feeding response rather than defensive or territorial aggression, with multiple strikes indicating that it had identified Elena as potential prey. James's attempts to intervene were hampered by the depth at which the attack occurred and the tiger shark's aggressive behavior toward any approaching objects. His emergency ascent procedures and surface communication protocols were executed correctly, though the remote location meant that professional rescue resources could not arrive in time to affect the outcome. The attack's duration and intensity made survival unlikely, even under ideal circumstances. Recovery operations required several hours due to the challenging underwater terrain and the need to ensure the safety of rescue divers. Elena's body was eventually located at a depth of 35 meters, having been carried away from the original attack site by the current and the shark's movements. Her camera equipment was found scattered across a wide area of the sea floor, with some images still recoverable from the memory cards. The incident prompted discussions within the underwater photography community about the risks associated with solo diving in areas known to harbor large predatory species. Marine biologists noted that tiger shark behavior can be unpredictable, particularly in reef environments where human activity may alter normal feeding patterns. Elena's death represented a tragic loss to the marine conservation community, as her work had contributed significantly to public understanding of reef ecosystem health. Her family established a scholarship fund supporting young marine photographers, ensuring that her commitment to ocean conservation would continue through future generations of underwater documentarians. The tragedy became a reminder that even experienced professionals face inherent risks when working in marine environments shared with apex predators. Elena's legacy lived on through her extensive photographic archives and the conservation initiatives that her work had helped to establish and support throughout her career. Off Gansby, South Africa, was restless that morning, swells rolling in harder than expected, the gray sky pressing low over the turquoise water as a Russian news crew prepared to film a special segment on the rising great white population near Shark Alley. The broadcast was supposed to be routine, with pre-planned commentary from the deck of a mid-sized boat anchored near a known shark hotspot. But the ocean had other plans. The team had been on site since dawn, setting up equipment on the deck and along the boat's edge, with 3 of the 6 crew members wearing wetsuits in case they needed underwater footage or had to assist divers. The live segment began smoothly, with the anchor standing near the railing, describing the ecological importance of great whites in the region. Just a few meters away, the ocean churned softly, dark and seemingly calm beneath the surface. Camera 2 was positioned just above the waterline to get a dramatic angle of the anchor with the sea behind it, while another camera operator moved along the side, tightening a lens and adjusting focus. Without warning, a rogue swell struck the side of the vessel. It wasn't massive, but it was strong enough to cause the boat to shift with a violent jolt, tilting suddenly to port and throwing several people off balance. The camera operator closest to the edge slipped first, landing hard on his side and skidding toward the railing. A production assistant grabbed at him, but the sudden shift caused both to lose footing. At nearly the same moment, one of the divers who had been kneeling near the rear tumbled backward, hitting the deck before rolling clean off the boat. Within seconds, 3 crew members were in the water, all yelling at once, their limbs flailing in panic. The live camera, still rolling, captured the screams and splashes before the control room abruptly cut the feed. Beneath them, movement stirred. The crew hadn't realized how close they were to a cruising great white until it surfaced in response to the commotion, its huge, pale body rising from the deep like a ghost through glass. Nearly 5 meters long and weighing well over a ton, the shark closed the distance in seconds. Its torpedo-shaped form moved with chilling precision, drawn by the vibrations of struggling prey above. Blood hadn't yet entered the water, but the chaotic motion had been enough to trigger an instinct it couldn't ignore. The first to see it was the production assistant, who caught a glimpse of its dorsal fin slicing through the waves as it veered toward the diver. The others tried to swim toward the boat, but the sudden coldness of fear, mixed with the drag of their soaked clothing, slowed their frantic strokes. The diver turned too late. The great white lunged upward with terrifying force, its jaws open wide, rows of serrated teeth flashing as it surged through the surface and bit down on the diver's right leg. The impact sent a spray of water and blood into the air. The bite wasn't a full amputation, but it ripped through the wetsuit and flesh with horrifying ease, leaving exposed muscle and gaping wounds. The diver's scream was muffled by the crashing waves, but the agony in his voice still pierced the morning air. He flailed instinctively, which only caused more blood to pump from the shredded limb, clouding the water in a widening red spiral. The shark circled again, not in a frenzied attack, but with measured curiosity, as if deciding whether to strike again. The 2 other crew members made it to the boat's stern, where 2 others leaned over with life rings and poles. One crewman managed to hook the production assistant and haul him up quickly, but the injured diver struggled to stay afloat. By now, the shark had passed beneath the injured man again, its massive shadow brushing just beneath the surface like a submarine. For a moment, it seemed like the attack would continue. The dorsal fin broke the water again as the shark turned, angling for another approach. But something changed. Perhaps the people shouting from above or the boat's motor starting up as the captain tried to shift position. The shark slowed, circling once more before diving down and vanishing into the murky green below. The remaining man in the water, covered in blood and barely conscious, was finally pulled aboard by 2 crew members using a rope tied around his chest. His leg was mangled, the wetsuit torn to ribbons, and flesh hanging in strips. The crew moved fast. Towels were pressed against the wounds, belts and cords were used as makeshift tourniquets, and the anchor, still pale and stunned, helped hold the diver steady as the team radioed for medical evacuation. The boat sped back toward the harbor at full throttle, bouncing over the waves while blood stained the deck and soaked into the towels clutched against the diver's thigh. None of the crew died that day, but the impact went far beyond physical wounds. The diver survived emergency surgery and would eventually walk again, though with permanent nerve damage and deep psychological scars. The others returned to work weeks later, but none could forget the raw violence they had witnessed, the size of the predator, the suddenness of the attack, and the helplessness of floating in water that could turn deadly in seconds. In the aftermath, producers faced heavy criticism for putting crew members at risk without sufficient safety protocols in place. Investigations focused on why the team had been so close to known shark waters without full cages or protective measures. Experts emphasized that great whites are not mindless killers, but are still large, instinct-driven predators, especially dangerous when startled or triggered by erratic movement. What made the incident so haunting wasn't just the bite or the blood. It was how fast everything happened, how quickly a moment meant for storytelling turned into a brush with death. For the crew, it was a reminder that nature doesn't care about cameras or broadcasts or schedules. The sea, the sharks, and the instincts beneath the surface follow their own rules. And sometimes they break through with terrifying force. The morning sun rose slowly over Nosy Boraha, casting golden light across the lagoon where generations of local fishermen had gathered octopus, spearfished reef fish, and taught their children to swim. The water was calm that day, smooth like glass, with no hint of danger lurking beneath. For 4 teenage boys from the nearby village, friends who had grown up together exploring the reefs and tidal pools, it was the perfect morning to go spearfishing, just as their fathers and uncles had done at their age. They walked down the sand with wooden spears and small hand nets, laughing, bare feet wet from the tide, unaware that something had changed beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to them, illegal waste dumping from a nearby commercial trawler, done quietly over several nights and never reported, had caused something far more dangerous to settle into the bay. The rotting fish remains and meat waste had drifted along the currents and pooled in deeper channels, drawing in predators that rarely entered the lagoon, among them at least one large tiger shark. By midday, the boys were deep into the lagoon, swimming and diving for octopus near the reef shelf. They had already caught 2, their net half full, and were laughing about who would take the biggest share home when the mood shifted. The first scream tore through the stillness so suddenly and so loudly that it startled the seabirds from the trees lining the shore. One of the boys, the smallest, had been closest to the drop-off where the reef gave way to deeper water. He had just surfaced from a dive when a massive gray shape rose from below and slammed into him with terrifying speed. There was a splash, a violent thrashing, and then silence. He never reappeared. The others froze for a moment, unsure what they had seen. Just a blur, a shadow, maybe a wave. But then the water turned red and panic took over. One boy turned and began swimming hard for shore, his limbs moving in desperate, frantic strokes. But the tiger shark was already circling, triggered by the chaos and the scent of blood in the water. It came from behind, hitting the fleeing boy across the back with its snout before biting into his side and dragging him under in a spiraling plume of foam and red. The third boy, blood already streaming from a bite to his upper thigh, kicked weakly toward a jagged coral outcrop that jutted just above the surface. He had felt the shark brush against his leg once before it struck again, latching onto his thigh and shaking violently. Somehow the shark let go. Maybe his struggling knocked the shark off balance, or maybe it was distracted by the screams coming from the others. Either way, he pulled himself onto the sharp rocks, screaming for help, his blood washing down the coral into the sea. From the village, several fishermen heard the cries and ran to the shoreline. Within minutes, 2 small wooden boats pushed off, their outboard motors sputtering as they raced toward the spot where the attack had happened. The bleeding boy was still clinging to the rock, pale and shaking, his hands slick with blood and coral cuts. The water around him was clouded red and bits of broken spear floated nearby. One of the fishermen jumped in and lifted him into the boat while the others searched for signs of the other boys. They found one of the bodies quickly, drifting not far from where the shark had first struck. His back had been torn open, his body limp, and his arms still stretched forward as if he had been swimming when it happened. The second was found deeper in the lagoon, near the reef ledge where the currents were stronger. He was missing one leg, and the other was marked with jagged bite wounds, likely sustained while the shark was thrashing him back and forth. The fourth boy, the first to be taken, was never found. Back on shore, word of the attack spread fast. Mothers collapsed onto the sand, screaming their sons' names as villagers tried to comfort them. The wounded boy was rushed to the nearest clinic where doctors worked to stop the bleeding and stabilize him. He survived, but the damage to his leg was severe. Muscle torn, nerves exposed, and infection already setting in from the dirty water and bite. He would never fish again. The village, still in shock, gathered that night along the shore for a candlelit vigil. Families stood in silence, holding each other as the sea lapped gently at the beach, now forever marked by what had happened. Elders led prayers, And fishermen spoke of the old warnings, how tiger sharks were not to be taken lightly, and how changes in the sea's balance could bring predators where they didn't belong. The lagoon, once sacred and safe, had turned hostile, and the people knew something had caused it. Within days, rumors began to surface about a commercial fishing boat spotted dumping barrels offshore late at night, and although no officials confirmed it, many believed the blood and rot had drawn the sharks closer than ever before. Locals demanded action, barriers, patrols, and protection for traditional fishing areas where their children played and their food was gathered. Signs were posted, and spearfishing was halted until further notice, but the damage had already been done. The lagoon, once a place of laughter and learning, now carried the memory of screams and blood, of a predator's shadow slicing silently through familiar waters. The survivors would never forget the terror of that day, and the village would never again see the reef as only a place of life and harvest. It had become something else, a reminder that even the most sacred waters could change, and that when balance is broken, the sea has a way of punishing those who forget its power. Every morning for the past 2 years, Geert Adrichim had risen before dawn, eager to slip into the cool waters near Gansby, South Africa, and swim the same 4-kilometer route that would soon test him like never before. A lifelong swimmer with a quiet passion for the ocean, Geert had trained relentlessly for his first charity swim, a crossing designed to raise funds for marine conservation and local schools. He knew these waters well. They were his backyard, a place of endless beauty where seals frolicked on the rocks and the sun glittered off rolling waves. Yet, like many who had come before, Geert also understood the bay's darker side, the presence of great white sharks, silent hunters that patrolled beneath the surface, unseen but always near. On the morning of June 15, 2013, the sea was calm and the sky cloudless, the air crisp with the freshness of winter turning to spring. Geert's family, his wife and 2 young children, stood on the shore, bundled in warm jackets and hats, watching as he prepared for his final training lap before the charity event scheduled for the following weekend. They had seen him swim this route dozens of times, admired his steady strokes and unshakable determination. Their quiet confidence made the sudden tragedy that followed all the more shocking. At approximately 7:10 a.m., about 300 meters from shore, the water rippled slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if disturbed by a swift movement beneath the surface. Geert was midway through his lap, steady and focused, unaware of the shadow moving fast below him. Then, without warning, the great white shark struck, rising from the depths with a force so powerful that it lifted Geert clear out of the water before dragging him down in a violent swirl of foam and blood. The roar of terror that escaped his throat was cut short, swallowed by the sea's vast silence. Nearby, a support kayaker named Thabo had been following Geert's progress closely, paddling steadily in the calm water. When he heard the scream and saw the sudden eruption of red spreading rapidly across the surface, his heart stopped. Thabo paddled faster than he ever had, reaching the spot where Geert had vanished only moments before. The water was churned, thick with blood and bubbles, but no sign of the swimmer's body. Thabo's voice cracked as he radioed for immediate rescue, desperation creeping into his tone. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, combing the bay with boats and divers searching for any trace of Geert. What they found were torn pieces of his wetsuit snagged on underwater rocks, and the global positioning system tracker he had worn on his wrist, now floating just beneath the surface. His body, however, was nowhere to be found. As hours passed and the search turned into a recovery effort, officials believed the great white had mistaken Geert for a seal, attacking with fatal intent. Despite extensive efforts, no remains were recovered, leaving the tragedy shrouded in uncertainty and pain. Back on shore, Geert's wife collapsed into the arms of friends and family as emergency crews arrived with news. Her children clung tightly to her legs, confused and frightened by the chaos unfolding before their eyes. The community gathered quickly, sharing grief and shock at the sudden loss of a man who had seemed invincible in his love for the ocean. The open-water swimming community was especially stunned, having followed Geert's training and admired his dedication and skill. His death was a cruel reminder of the bay's wild nature, where beauty and danger existed side by side, inseparable and ever-present. A memorial swim was organized a week later, drawing swimmers, family, and friends to the bay to honor Geert's memory. Divers formed a circle over the spot where he had vanished, their bubbles rising in quiet tribute beneath the waves. Small boats dotted the water, while on shore, candles and flowers marked a makeshift shrine. Though the ocean had taken him, Geert's spirit lived on in the hearts of those who loved him and in the waters he had known so well. In the days that followed, discussions around safety and shark activity intensified. Officials reiterated that great white sharks were a natural part of the bay's ecosystem, playing a crucial role in maintaining the marine balance, even as they posed risks to humans who ventured too close. Many called for increased patrols, improved warning systems, and stronger community education about how to safely share the ocean with these apex predators. Still, for many who knew the bay intimately, there was an unspoken understanding. Its wild beauty always carried quiet, unquestionable danger. Geert's family, devastated yet proud, spoke openly about their loss, urging swimmers and ocean lovers to respect the sea and its creatures. They emphasized the importance of preparation, vigilance, and support during open water swims, hoping no one else would endure what they had. The charity event went ahead with heightened safety measures, including more escorts and real-time shark monitoring. But the shadow of Geert's disappearance lingered in every stroke and every wave. False Bay, with its sparkling waters and rugged coastline, remained a place of challenge and wonder, a reminder that nature in all its majesty demanded both awe and caution. Geert Adrichem's last lap had ended not in triumph but in tragedy, marking a somber chapter in the story of the bay and the people who dared to swim within.